What's going on, y'all? Shmay, aka back with another episode of the Hoop Coalition podcast, brought to you by me. Wanted to get right into all of the happenings that have been going on with the NBA so far. Obviously, with the NBA Finals ending and the NBA offseason off to an extremely eventful start. Before I get started, you know what I always have to say. Go ahead and follow me on IG at coalition.hoops. Follow me on X at coalition hoops. And also, please subscribe to the YouTube. It is free and it will help a lot. Now let's get into the video. So, coming off of the NBA Finals, we knew there were going to be some major shakeups in free agency this offseason, obviously with a lot of high ticket, high value, and high level name players being available for trade or for free agency market negotiations. We just knew there was going to be a lot going on, right? And I think the biggest name that obviously got brought up in a lot of these rumors was Giannis Antetokounmpo. Obviously, it's already been confirmed he will be a Miami Heat along with Bobby Portis, and he was traded for a bevy of picks and players: Tyler Hero, Jaime Jaquez, Khalil Ware, 3 first, I believe a second, and then a first round pick swap. And he is in Miami with Bobby Portis, and he will be teaming up with Bam Adebayo. We don't know if Norman Powell's going to be there. Andrew Wiggins will probably stay. Davion Mitchell will be there, and then pretty much that's it. I mean, Nikola Jokic is still there. Pat Lawson is still there. Yeah, so they don't really have a bench necessarily, and I think the Giannis move to Miami wasn't necessarily super surprising. Obviously, going into sort of the off season, we knew there were two options for Giannis. One was going to be Boston, the other one was going to be Miami. I personally believe, and a lot of other people believe, that Boston was going to have the better package, that Boston was going to be able to provide a more stable sort of environment in terms of player personnel for Giannis to play around, and it will be a better opportunity for Giannis to win right away because they wouldn't necessarily have to get as much away as Miami did because obviously of Jaylen Brown's contract, and obviously Jaylen Brown would have been the main piece in a Giannis deal. We'll get to Jaylen Brown later. However, that didn't happen. Apparently that wasn't enough for the Milwaukee Bucks. Obviously, if you're going to trade away a generational talent, a lot of people would say the most important player in your franchise's history, who is still capable of being an MVP caliber player right now, then you need more than a player and maybe a couple picks or two players and a couple picks. And that's what the Milwaukee Bucks got. So we don't know what they're going to do with Tyler Hero. Reports are saying that they're going to try to flip him. I wouldn't be surprised if they allow him to play out the first half of the season and then try to see what they can kill him at the trade deadline next year. Or if he plays well enough, he may end up staying the entire year. We just don't know. I think Khalil Ware and Jaime Jaquez are pretty safe. I think they're going to be in Milwaukee for next year, more than likely, unless they show increased value that allows them to, be used in order to get more talent on the trade market at the trade deadline next year. Yeah, but I think Milwaukee, they ended up, obviously making out pretty well with all the draft capital they got and with the 3 players they got as well. Oh, sorry, 4 players, because they also got Kasparis Giannis as well from Miami. And then for the Miami Heat piece, I think, Giannis with Bam is going to be very interesting. I think the floor spacing may be an issue, so I think Miami definitely needs shooting. And I think that's something that they're going to try to address throughout the offseason. They're going to try to get probably some shooters for cheap, I would imagine. And if they do that, I think they're going to be a very viable team in the East. I don't think they're necessarily super close to winning a championship, or at least coming out of the East. But anything can happen in the East, so we'll see what happens. But I do like the initial sort of thought of Bam Adebayo and Giannis from a fit perspective, because I think Bam is a good enough, mid-range sort of floor spacer to where he can give Giannis a lot of room to operate. And also, I think defensively, that's going to be the greatest strength. I think defensively, they're going to be, it'll be tough to deal with. And I think that's going to make them viable in the East. Once again, I don't think they're going to win the East, but I think they'll make them viable, right? And then, obviously, we had other trades that happened. Obviously, the biggest one is Lamelo Ball being traded from the Charlotte Hornets to the Minnesota Timberwolves. And obviously he gets paired with Anthony Edwards, and the Minnesota Timberwolves ended up giving up Naj Reid and I believe a couple of picks as well. Or no, 3 seconds. So they ended up giving 3 seconds of Naj Reid for LaMelo Ball and Josh Green. Obviously, this is after the Minnesota Timberwolves ended up trading away Julius Randle to the Brooklyn Nets for, I believe, 3 seconds as well. So a lot of movement from the Minnesota Timberwolves, who I guess they believed they were stagnant after what happened this past playoffs against the Spurs. I felt like maybe they felt like they needed to shake things up a bit and move in a different direction, maybe go towards a high level powered backcourt that could sort of give other backcourts problems in the Western Conference. Have another individual who can create offense for themselves, take a lot of pressure off of Anthony Edwards when he's not able to either play or when he's just not having a very good game. Lamelo Ball definitely has that ability to do that. And honestly, man, I feel like all in all, I feel like the Charlotte Hornets, they got a lot back for LaMelo and Josh Green. And on top of that, they own their next 13 and 14 first round picks. And the only other team that has more draft capital than them through 2033 are the Oklahoma City Thunder, who, by the way, traded away Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins for 2 second round picks apiece. So now they have 4 second round picks. Just another Sam Presti masterclass, including what he did in the draft. But anyways, back to Minnesota and Charlotte. I think the Charlotte Hornets were able to pretty much build the start of a pretty deep treasure trove of, draft capital that they can use to rebuild, their team around Antetokounmpo and Brandon Miller. And time will tell how good that's going to be. I think coming up with Khan's rookie season, the brass in Charlotte, I think they have a level of trust in Antetokounmpo that he's going to be able to, along with Brandon Miller, be the guy for them. That remains to be seen. This game still needs to develop a little bit more, but we'll see what happens. Even though, Charlotte, coming off of this season, even though they didn't make the playoffs, had one of the best stretches they've had in years. They started off the season really slow, and then towards the middle of the season after All-Star break, they just went on a tear where they were winning a ridiculous amount of their games. And a lot of that had to do with Lamelo Ball's influence. And offensively, he's extraordinary. He could be extraordinary at times, but he can also be very frustrating to watch. And I think that's going to be the struggle. When I struggle, that's going to be something he's going to have to work on, being paired with Anthony Edwards, a guy who's a two-way guy, an individual who has refined his shot making, his shot diet over the, over the years. And being paired with somebody like that, I think he's going to have to refine what he's able to do offensively as well, and also defensively. I think, the Minnesota Timberwolves losing Julius Randle and Naj Reid, they give up a lot of size. I think it was a consensus that OKC and San Antonio were better than Minnesota. But now I think, Denver with a healthy Jokic, not having to do with Randle and Naj Reid, assuming they don't get those 2 holes filled, by the start of next year, you could say a healthy Denver team is also better than Minnesota. Like, if they were to meet right now in a series, I would pick Denver, right? Just because, you don't have as many bodies to throw at Jokic, especially when he's healthy, and then you have a guy like LaMelo Ball, who, at the end of the day, can be a target on defense. And you see a guy like Jamal Murray, I think he's going to try to hunt that matchup all day long, and that's going to create a lot of problems for Minnesota. But that remains to be seen. Right now, all we're talking about is what it's looking like on paper. Obviously, these rosters have not been filled out yet because these trades just happened. So these front offices are going to have all offseason to sort of fill out the periphery of their roster. But all in all, I feel like the Minnesota offense is going to be awesome to watch. They're going to be super fun. But defensively, I don't think they're any closer to winning a championship. I don't think they're better than OKC right now. I don't think they're better than San Antonio. And I definitely do not think they're better than a healthy, keyword, healthy Denver team. Healthy Nikola Jokic, healthy Jamal Murray, healthy Aaron Gordon. I think they beat them in a series if these teams were to meet in a series as presently constituted. And that's just my thoughts. I really feel that way. But, it remains to be seen. The front offices still have to sort of work some things out, right? And so those are really the 2 big trades. Obviously, we had some other sort of minor-ish trades that happened. Julius Randle gets sent to the Brooklyn Nets. He is now going to be paired with Michael Porter Jr. I think it's safe to assume that the Nets will probably be one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. When you have 2 guys, and Michael Porter Jr. and Julius Randle, who, all respect to them, don't have the best history of shot selection or shot diet, and often, don't have the ability to be disciplined in when they choose to take their shots, and that can cause a problem, right? That could definitely cause a problem. So I don't think they're going to be really any good this year. But in terms of other teams that we saw make moves, little minor moves, right? Obviously, we got to start with the Wizards. They ended up reing up Trey Young 214 over 5 seasons, and I do feel like with the Wizards coming off the season they came off with, obviously acquiring Anthony Davis and Trey Young, both of whom did not play this season, along with the ascension of Alex Sarr, of Trey Johnson, and of Keshawn George. I do feel like the Wizards are in a prime position to really, really do things next year. Obviously, the draft is now passed. We saw what happened with the draft. The Wizards obviously ended up taking AJ DeBonta out of BYU, so he will presumably take on that leadership role, that starting almost maybe 2 or 3 guard role with the Wizards next season. Can't wait to see what he looks like in summer league. That's going to be a good indicator of what we may see in the season. But just moving forward, I really feel like the Wizards, along with, getting Trey Young locked in, even if Anthony Davis doesn't come back, even if they deal him for somebody else, I do feel like the Wizards are in prime position to make a jump in the Eastern Conference. I think in terms of all of the Eastern Conference teams, they're going to be the team to make the biggest jump because of the, the re-signing of Trae Young, essentially, the drafting of AJ DeBonta, and another year of development with those 3 guys I talked about, right? Alex Sarr, Trey Johnson, Keshawn George. I think all those guys showed flashes last year, and also they have a really good bench. Right, they got Will Riley on the bench. They got Julian Reese on the bench, who's the younger brother of Angel Reese, also a rebounder just like his sister. They have some guys on that bench, man, that I think they can really, really do some damage, in the Eastern Conference, when they get a chance. I think they just needed one, a solid floor general and a guy who could lead them. And I think Trae Young has the ability to do that. And then they need a talent. They need a generational talent. I think AJ DeBosa is definitely that. So I'm going to be looking forward to what the Wizards are able to do this year. I think they will make the biggest jump out of any team in the Eastern Conference. And then sort of pivoting, to the NBA draft, which happened this past Thursday. I do feel like the Memphis Grizzlies had a really good draft. Right, you end up getting Cam Boozer. You know what I mean? He's the guy that I believe was the most NBA ready, NBA level body, can finish around the rim. You know what I'm saying? Doesn't have the ability to fully create his own shot, but if you put him with a guy who can feed him the ball, he can do some damage early. I feel like Darius A-Cup going to Sacramento is going to be perfect for him because I feel like he's going to be given the reins very early and he's going to be able to show what he can do offensively for a team that needs that offense, right? I feel like Caleb Wilson going to the Bulls is also going to be good. I don't think the Bulls are going to be very good, but I think he's going to show flashes of how athletically gifted he is and just how underrated he is as an overall skilled player, as a scorer, and as a defender. And I think he's going to be able to show a lot of people just how good he is. And then you have OKC getting a guy like Otega away, and Bennett Sturts. You know what I'm saying? You had obviously my team, the Houston Rockets, we ended up getting Bruce Thornton in the second round. There are a lot of teams that got better through this draft, and I feel like we're going to see a lot of these rookies get a lot of time early in the season next year. Especially for these teams like a Brooklyn team who ended up getting Mikael Burnham, right, out of Louisville, an explosive guard. Right, I think he's going to be awesome. I think LeBaron Furlan, out of Alabama, you know what I'm saying? He got drafted to Sixers. I think he's going to be very good. There are a lot of guys, man, who I just feel like are going to be really, really good to start off. And I'm going to be looking forward to it. But, to me personally, I think the best teams or the teams that had the best drafts, in my opinion, I would probably say the Memphis Grizzlies. I would say the OKC Thunder had an awesome draft. And obviously the Washington Wizards, I think they had a very good draft as well, just because I think AJ DeBonta, even though I think Cam Boozer probably is the most pro ready, I think AJ DeBonta is the most generational. I think he has the highest upside to be the best sort of player in this draft, right? And obviously you got Utah who ended up getting Darren Peterson, and now Utah, they just have a bevy of sort of players that they can build around. Obviously they ended up getting Triple J, towards the middle of last season. They still got Laurie. They still got Keontae George. They have Ace Bailey, now Darren Peterson. They still have Walker Kessler for the time being. We'll see what happens with him, whether he resigns or whether he continue or whether they trade him somewhere else or whether he decides to go somewhere else. But for the time being, I really feel like the Utah Jazz, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Washington Wizards, I feel like all of those teams had pretty solid drafts, I would say. And it remains to be seen how these draft picks shape up. I think a lot of them are going to get a lot of opportunity early. If you're asking me who my rookie of the year pick is going to be, I'm going to say AJ DeMonta just because of the position he's going to be put in early. He's going to have the ball in his hands. He's going to be asked to do a lot for a very young team. And I think he's going to, for the most part, live up to that challenge because I think he has all of the skills to affect winning while also being individually great, which is a very rare thing for anybody to have, let alone a rookie. So I think he's going to really, really do well in Washington, man. And honestly, that kind of brings me to the main point that I wanted to get to with all of these trades happening and things of that nature. We got to talk about the trade that didn't happen, right? And obviously, that is Jaylen Brown to the Milwaukee Bucks. Like I said before Giannis got sent to Miami, a lot of people, myself included, were believing that Jaylen Brown would be the individual who would be getting traded for Giannis Antetokounmpo, and he would be in Milwaukee. And that obviously didn't happen. It is just a long, long saga of Jaylen Brown being put on the trade block by the Boston Celtics. And it's gotten to the point now where I feel like, you know, he has every right to feel slighted. He has every right to feel hurt. He has every right to feel underappreciated, especially coming off the individual year he had where he was in MVP talks and he was able to, for the most part, lead his team who had lost their quote unquote best player to a 56 win season. Yeah, they got bounced out early in the playoffs, right? But he led them to a 56 win season when Jason Tatum was mostly hurt with a whole bunch of young guys, you know? And for this to be the third time he's put on the trading block, like I said, he's been on the trading block since about 2018, 2019. I believe he was on trading block with KD. He was on trading block with AD. And now he's on trading block with Giannis. And at this moment, they're still shopping Jaylen Brown. They still shopping Jaylen Brown to see what they can get for him. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Jaylen Brown understands his value. And I think he knows that if the Boston Celtics allow him to come back, I think it's going to put his best foot forward. But I think he knows and the organization knows that, that relationship is sort of run its course. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Boston Celtics, regardless of how awesome Jaylen Brown is, regardless of how he's developed into this two-way player who can score from all three levels, defend at a high level every single night, a guy who can lead your team in the playoffs, a guy who won Eastern Conference Finals MVP and Finals MVP when the Boston Celtics finally got over the hump, right? A guy who in 22 in the NBA Finals was the best player on your team. And the reason why you lost to the Golden State Warriors wasn't necessarily because of Jaylen Brown, but it was because of Jason Tatum and his inability to protect the basketball, right? So if I'm Jaylen Brown, I totally understand the frustration. I understand why he may feel that, he may not necessarily want to be in Boston anymore. And at this point, I think my advice to him would just continue to be professional. If you go on Twitch, if you go on your stream and you say things like, this season was the best season for me. It was the most fun I had and things of that nature. People may take that the wrong way, not understanding context, not understanding the fact that you've been asked to be a role player. You've been asked to come off the bench. You've been asked to be the second fiddle to a guy a lot of people think you're better than. And you finally got the opportunity to play and to show how good you are, how great you are. And not only did you do that, you exceeded a lot of people's expectations. and turn what was supposed to be a bye year, what was supposed to be a throwaway year, into an incredibly successful regular season and then quasi MVP campaign. So yeah, I would be completely perturbed if I was Jalen Brown, and he has every right to be. But my advice to him would be continue to stay professional. Don't let them change who you are. Don't let them allow you to compromise who you are. Continue to be the inquisitive, intelligent, and extremely talented basketball player we know you are. And whether you're in Boston, whether you're in Golden State, whether you're in Washington, whether you're in Atlanta, wherever you are, I'm just naming teams at this point. Know that you still have the talent to be one of the best two-way players in this league and continue to do that. And everything else will work itself out. Because at the end of the day, nobody can argue with the work. Nobody can argue with the results. Nobody can argue with the talent. And if you do, you're just foolish. You know what I mean? But I, the Boston Celtics, they have this love affair with Jason Tatum, and I can understand why. Because Jason Tatum is an extremely talented player. But Jaylen Brown, one could argue, has done more with the Boston Celtics or for the Boston Celtics for the Boston Celtics than Jason Tatum has. And that's a conversation that we may have to go deeper into as the offseason goes on. But I'm willing to make that argument. And if anybody is willing to argue with me, we can have that conversation anytime, any place. But I think Jaylen Brown has been mistreated by the Boston Celtics by how many times he's been on the trading block, despite showcasing a level of willingness to sacrifice his own individual accolades with the team. And when he was finally asked to step up and be that guy, he was able to be that guy, you know? And that's just it, man. And honestly, sort of segueing from Jaylen Brown, to a guy who came into the NBA with a lot of, hype, deservedly so. A guy who, his organization has pretty much stood by him for the vast majority of his career. And not only have they stood by him for the vast majority of his career, they've been able to sort of thrive, you know, temporarily, when they built the team around him that suited him, and that's John Morant. I think the Memphis Grizzlies, not being able to get off of John Morant at this point where no team necessarily wants him is indicative of just how far he's fallen as a guy who was an extremely athletic, electric sort of guard who could really affect, your team in a lot of ways. And he was able to show that in a very, very short stint, especially in his third season, when he had a team of him, Desmond Bain, Dylan Brooks, Triple J, Taylor Jenkins was the coach. It just seemed like a very perfect sort of circumstance in Memphis. And ever since then, man, obviously all three of those guys have gone. Ja's the only one that's there. They just ended up getting, Isaiah Stewart from the Pistons for 3 seconds. And now, you have new reports stating that, no team wants John Morant without draft capital. And a couple of years ago, there's no way that would have been the case. But alas, this is where we are right now, and a lot of it has to do with a lot of the off the court issues and also the limitations that he hasn't necessarily been able to go overcome on the court, whether it be injury or whether it be a limitation of not being able to have a reliable perimeter shot while having a waning athletic base. And that could spell trouble for John Morant. So I do think that at the end, Ja will probably get dealt this season to a team that maybe is just so desperate for somebody at that point guard position that they'll kind of cave and not necessarily need all of the draft capital that they may necessarily want. But that remains to be seen, man. But sad, just sort of circumstances out in Memphis. Not necessarily currently, because currently I think, their GM has done a really good job of sort of flipping a lot of the prior players that they did have and just trying to usher in this new sort of regime. Obviously spearheaded by Cam Boozer and company. But on top of that, I feel like this John Morant sort of looming situation, if it goes into the offseason, I think John Morant is, going to be professional enough to try to put that behind him and try to play. But I don't think they're going to let it get to that point. And just like the Jaylen Brown situation, I think the Boston Celtics will be better to get off of him. I think Memphis will be way better if they get off of John Morant, because I think it will be addition by subtraction sort of deal simply from a culture perspective because you don't want to have any distractions in any sort of NBA locker room, regardless of the talent level. And unfortunately, I think with all the past transgressions that Ja's had, along with how he's viewed not only by the larger NBA community, but by Memphis themselves, I think it would be a distraction if he were to stay there throughout the season. And all in all, man, I think we're gonna have to see sort of how this progresses. But I do feel for Ja, and I am rooting for him, and I hope wherever he goes, he has continued success and a resurgence wherever he goes. But I just don't think it's going to be in Memphis. So we'll have to see how that sort of plays out, man. But yeah, those are my thoughts on all of the recent sort of happenings in the NBA. Obviously, it's time for us to really gear up for summer league. I'm super excited about that. And yeah, man, we'll see, a lot of these guys and how they look with their new teams, in summer league. And obviously, as we get closer to the season, how these, sort of draft picks start to look, along with any other movement that happens, on the trade front. Obviously, LeBron is always going to be a big topic of discussion. Him possibly joining the Golden State Warriors or staying with the Lakers, along with other players as well. So we'll see how that all sort of shapes out, man. But until then, once again, thank you guys so much for watching my videos. I'll say it again. Please go ahead and follow me on IG at coalition.hoops. Follow me on Twitter at coalitionhoops and subscribe here. It's free. Y'all take it easy. I'll see y'all next time.